Hello. Today I'm going to be sharing with you why it took me almost 20 years to get into a regular habit of practicing meditation. So, I'm the kind of person who it's quite hard for me to stick to a habit. I don't know about you, but for me, if it's a habit which is something for my health or well-being, I may do it for a while and I'll get excited about it, and it may last for a few months, and then I'm like, can't be bothered, or something would happen and I wouldn't carry on. And I'm obviously very much into meditation and mindfulness. That's my full-time work now. So I really like it and it's really good. But I found for years and years and years, I'd be really, really into it. I'd be very motivated. I'd be practicing it. And then there'd be a day where I don't feel good or I don't feel well. And so then I would stop, and then I would stop for a few weeks, and then I wouldn't be feeling that good. And then I'd start again. And it'd be just carry on going in waves and waves and waves. And at first, I maybe used self criticism, so I should be able to do it. Why can I not do it? Then I kind of practiced acceptance in a way, I guess, and just said, that's just the way it is. It's going to be times when I practice it, and then times when I don't practice it. And it was just always this kind of slight yo-yo thing. And although I was very passionate about it and talking about it, and even writing loads of books about it, it was very hard to get into a consistent habit. And so there was, I guess, an underlying frustration there and a disappointment with myself. And I know that happened to some other people as well. So I knew I wasn't alone. And yet there were some people who were able to manage to continuously practice it as a daily habit. So I thought, how come some people can do it and some can't? And do I need to just accept that I can't do it? And I kind of had, actually, until being the geeky person that I am, started doing some research, and I started researching habits just out of curiosity. And I noticed loads of people writing about habits, and there's all sorts of different specialists and experts. But as I traced it back, it all came back to one particular researcher who's based at Stanford University, and his work seems to be referred to by many different people. Sometimes they didn't mention him, sometimes they did. I don't know if they're trying to keep it a secret or something. But this guy they kept coming back to. And he created a system which he kind of discovered, even though he was a world expert on habits and he was teaching it for ages. It was just one day he came across and came up with this concept. It seems really, really simple. The problem with it is it's so simple, people think, I don't need to do that because it's just too easy. And so they don't follow it. And so then they don't get the benefits from it. And so this guy's called BJ Fogg, Dr. BJ Fogg, or maybe he's a professor. And half the time he's in Stanford, half the time he seems to be in Hawaii, which is very nice. And he came up with this concept, which is very simple, called tiny habits. And so he's been following and tracking people trying to cultivate habits for decades. And one of the key things he found out is that motivation fluctuates. Our motivation doesn't stay high all the time. Whenever we want to start a new habit, and this happens every January, people want to start a new resolution. It's usually to do with dieting or to do with exercise or maybe with meditation and stuff. And the motivation is really high, and they genuinely are very determined to do this. Like, okay, I'm going to do it this time. I'm going to give it a good shot. And that's because your motivation is high. And then something would happen one day, or it's a very gray skies, or you don't feel well, the motivation goes down. And so you don't practice it on that day, because no matter how much you want to, if the motivation's not there, you can't do it. And so you think you can overcome low how everyone thinks. But if it was true, then everyone would have brilliant habits all the time. And so you have this low motivation, and then you don't manage it that day. Then the next thing that arises naturally is lack of self-compassion. So you say, oh man, I messed up. And so the next day you just say, oh, well, I can't do it. I give up. One of the problems of this, getting into this cycle again and again, is that you expect yourself to give up. And so then you get into this cycle of not really being able to stick to habits. But it's not your fault at all. It's all to do with the way our society sees that habits need to be formed. And it's too much high expectations that other people put on ourselves and we put on ourselves. So what BJ Fogg discovered through his approach of tiny habits is that it needs to follow a certain formula. You need to create your habit so it's so small and so easy that even on the days when your motivation is really low, you can still do it, because it's a very easy habit to do. So when your motivation's high, yeah, you can do it and it feels too easy, but you have to stick to the easy thing. And when your motivation's low, you stick to it too. Then gradually you can build that habit up and then it becomes more established. It's like you've got a small seedling and you're watering it every day, watering it. And then gradually it forms into a tree and then it becomes a strong habit. And so this tiny habits follow certain principles. The first principle is obviously needs to be tiny, but specifically what he suggests, it needs to take less than 30 seconds. So I tried this. So I use this formula for meditation and it worked for me long term. And it could work for other stuff too. So I tried telling myself, okay, when I wake up in the morning, no matter how I feel, I'll try doing 5 minutes of meditation. That didn't work. So then I thought, okay, when I wake up in the morning, and that was my cue, I would do 1 minute. And even on some days, I didn't have the motivation to do 1 minute. So then I went down to just one breath. And that's what worked for me. So I thought, okay, every day when I wake up in the morning, I'll do a minimum of 1 mindful breath. And then that's it. I don't have to do any more if I don't want to. And that was my tiny habit. And so you need to find out what's the right one for you for your meditation or mindfulness or whatever. If you want to do push-ups every day, you'd start with 1 push-up or 2 push-ups. If you want to start with going for a walk every day, you just start with just putting on your trainers, nothing else, something that takes 30 seconds. So you need to come up with something that's really, really tiny. So tiny that it doesn't matter how low your motivation, you can do it. What's the other thing about a tiny habit? Yeah. So the next thing is it needs to be practiced every day. It needs to be a daily thing because it's a habit, because you want to cultivate the habit in your life. If it's done, oh yeah, I'll do it on Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays, or Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, it's not being practiced regularly, so it doesn't form into a habit. So it needs to be done every day. So at the moment, we've got this daily mindfulness club, and we do mindfulness every single day, whether it's weekdays or weekends. And therefore, it becomes much easier for it to form a habit. And you can do that for yourself. Like when you wake up in the morning, you do your mindful breathing or whatever it is, or let's say if you're into yoga, you do 1 yoga stretch. So that's the next thing. It needs to be done every day. And I'm just looking at the diagram. I'm not sure I can share. Oh yeah. So the other thing is that it needs to take little effort. So less than 30 seconds needs to take little effort. And the reason is that when you try to cultivate a habit which takes effort, again, you're going to need motivation. And if it takes too much effort, it isn't a pleasant experience. And the way habits form, they need to have a pleasant experience in it somewhere. If it's just unpleasant all the way through and even at the end, then there's no chemical called dopamine that's released into your system. And so the habit doesn't get wired in. And so one of the kind of hacks that BJ Fogg discovered is to actually celebrate once you've done your little habit. And this is when it gets a bit weird. So you do your, like, let's say if you're as mindfulness, you do your bit of mindful breathing, like, and at the end you'd celebrate in some way, like you go, yes, I did it. Oh, come on, me. Or you just simply smile. And he has all these different types of ways that you could celebrate, but you find some sort of positive experience, some positive way in which you can enjoy. But just the fact that you're smiling as you take a mindful breath, for example, would be a pleasant experience, and that may start to help form the habit. So there's some little tips that needs to be take less than 30 seconds, needs to be practiced daily, and needs to take little effort. Now, the extra thing I would say is that when you want to start a habit, all habits need to have a cue, some sort of trigger to remind you that, it's time for me to do the habit. If you think about something like Facebook, they're experts at getting us into the habit of using their app. And so they use quite a lot of triggers. One of them is a notification. So the red color that you see would pop up on your screen. And then after a while, the trigger, this is the amazing thing about the technology apps and stuff, in that just your feeling can be the trigger. So you feel bored, and the trigger would be to open up your phone to look at a certain app. Or you hear the sound of a text message or an email, and that sound becomes the trigger. So for your meditation, the trigger, so for me, the trigger was waking up in the morning, a very simple trigger. Okay, that's the cue. Like, okay, I've woken up and now it's time for my 1 mindful breath, and I can do more if I want, but the minimum is 1 mindful breath. And so if you're practicing every day, I would say usually around the same time every day, you'd have that same sort of trigger. It could be after you have a shower, or after you brush your teeth, or after you've had your breakfast, or after you've done your whatever, after your lunch, whatever it is for you, but it's part of your routine. And then there needs to be this reward at the end. So let me just see if I can share with you the image of the tiny habit. Share screen, Chrome tab. Ah, yes, this might come up for you. I think you can see that. Yes. So there's the image of what is a tiny habit. It's a personal behavior that you do at least once a day. It takes at least 30 seconds and requires little effort. As you cross your tiny habits, you must match the criteria above. So keep it nice and tiny. So there's a simple image or a diagram there to show you what a tiny habit is. And so, yeah, I encourage you to have a go. So if there's a new habit you want to create, September's a good one, I feel, because if it's the start of a month, so it's Tuesday. So we're starting our next kind of daily mindfulness club in September. I mean, there's other things that can help to cultivate habits too. So practicing it with others is really good. So for meditation, you could do it with us. For exercise, maybe you could team up with a friend. If it's food, you can maybe do a challenge together with someone else, and you've got that accountability with another person. And then the other extra trick that comes to mind is to try and create your environment in a way that would remind you. So one technique they use for exercise is that you put your trainers next to your bed, so then you just see them, and that becomes the trigger. Seeing the trainers, like, okay, I'm going to put the trainers on and take it from there. It could be a meditation bell for you, or you could have a meditation space in your home, and that could be your cue or your trigger to do the practice. So there's all these little techniques that you could do. And so if you haven't researched it, habits before, then check out Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg. He's got a free email course. There's another great book called Atomic Habits. I can't remember the name of the author. That's a very popular one too. You could just, look at some of their TED Talks. I think both of them all have done TED Talks. You can watch a short video to learn a little bit more about habit formation, or just begin with what I've shared. And the biggest challenge is to keep it tiny, because if we just get too ambitious, we're like, I don't need to do 30 seconds. I can do more than that. And then you can end up being too ambitious and not managing to stick to the habit. To give you an idea, let me just quickly finish. I love this experiment that they did. They repeated this experiment loads of times around the world. What they did is they got two groups. One group, they said, we're going to give you free gym clothes. We're going to give you free gym membership. You can exercise as much as you want. It's not going to cost you any money. Off you go. And the other group, they just said, hey guys, I know you work in the office here. Walk up one flight of stairs, and every day just take an extra step. And then they followed both these groups after 3 months, 6 months, even a few years later. And the group where they just had to walk one extra step per day were doing more exercise. They had things like low blood pressure, better health outcomes. Whereas the group where they'd given them free gym membership and all that stuff, they hadn't made use of that much at all. So again, it's another example of taking very, very small actions. And I got that research from a book called Kaizen. And Kaizen means in Japanese small change. So there's another book to check out. All right, well, thanks a lot for watching, and look forward to seeing you again tomorrow. Feel free to ask any questions in the comments, and wishing you a great day. Bye for now.